are you, my holy sisters and brothers? That was a Havdalah ceremony that was actually performed in Israel maybe a year ago when crowds were still gathering. That was posted on YouTube by Ozzy Schwartz. How are you? How are you? Let's light up the darkness as we start a new week and wish each other Shavua Tov, a good week. A good vach in Yiddish, a good week in English. Who's with us as we're getting started with a little learning on a Saturday night? Stephen from New Hampshire, Melissa from Great Neck, Paula from Chicago, Shmuela says Lila Tov, Anne from Merced, James from Indianapolis, Ruth from Phoenix, Solomon from Mexico, bienvenido. James from Tennessee, Tracy from Oklahoma, Gwen is back from vacation and glad to be back. Wait a minute, skipping. Michelle says another wild night in southern Indiana. Okay. Don is with us from Contra Costa County in California. Beth from Florida. Bill from Pittsburgh. Chaim from Charlotte. Janet from Denver. Annie with us from Michigan, and Zach says Shavua Tov. Welcome all. Lynn with us from Texas on the YouTube side. All right, let's get into it. Where are we holding? This is Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We're on Daf Tzadi Zayin, that's page 97. We're in the final chapter of the Tractate, chapter 10. And this is our third day on this first Mishna, discussing the first Mishna of the chapter. And we've been talking about what happens when a person finds tifilin, abandoned tifilin, lost tifilin, on the road, in the public domain, on Shabbos. Tefillin is something that a Jewish man is obligated to put on every morning, every day. You wrap tefillin. I've actually got my tefillin right here, and we're going to be discussing them a little bit. I can actually keep some money in my tefillin bag because that way every day when I open my tefillin bag, I immediately put some dollar in the tzedakah box, in the charity box. This is the arm tefillin that I would put on first in the morning. We're going to be talking about that in a little moment. So I'm going to just unwrap that here and take its protective cover off. And this is the head tefillin. And we're going to be talking about that momentarily also, particularly this knot and these two letters that are embossed on the head tefillin, which we will be discussing in a moment. So that's tefillin. And because we're obligated to wrap it during the week, but we are prohibited to put it on, as we've discovered in our discussion the last 2 days, we're prohibited to put tefillin on Shabbos. Why? Because when the command to put on tefillin every day was given, it's worded as, and this shall be a sign between God and the Jewish people. And likewise, Shabbos, which is in the Ten Commandments, when it's given is that Shabbos shall be a sign between God and the Jewish people. So we don't put it on Shabbos when it would be redundant. And there was also some other reasons that were given, but we don't put tefillin on Shabbos. Therefore, it turns out that tefillin, such a holy object, is muksa on Shabbos, meaning it has no use on Shabbos. We don't put tefillin on Shabbos. And therefore, on Shabbos, it acquires this similar status to a hammer or a drill or a saw, tools that are used for work. Since we don't do work on Shabbos, we don't touch those items on Shabbos. Likewise, we try not to even touch our tefillin. If it happens to be in a place where we need its place, we'll move the tefillin. It's okay. But generally speaking, we don't touch the tefillin. Now we've got the problem that somebody lost their tefillin, or even some bundles of tefillin maybe fell off a truck on Friday, and they're just out there in the public domain. Now, it's a very holy object. It has inside the tefillin in these boxes. Here it's divided into 4 sections because there's 4 scrolls of holy writing on parchment inside with the names of God. So we don't want to leave that just lying in the public domain where it could be damaged or what do you call it? Debased in some way. we want to save it. We want to preserve the tefillin, even though it's not ours. So we'd like to just take it home into a safe place, a protected place, and get it out of the public domain. But we can't carry it because it's in the public domain. So the question we've been discussing is, can we put on the tefillin, wear the tefillin, as it were, wrap the arm tefillin on the hand, on the arm, put the head tefillin on the head, and in that way bring it home, not by carrying, because it's prohibited to carry in the public domain if we don't have an eruv, some kind of community eruv that would permit carrying there. So that carrying would be permitted on Shabbos. We don't have that, so we can't carry any object more than 4 cubits in the public domain. But if we're wearing it, wearing is not considered carrying. Obviously, you can wear your clothing. That's not considered carrying. You can walk around on Shabbos in any public domain with your clothes on, and you can even wear ornaments, adornments, like jewelry. That's also considered wearing and not carrying. So the question is, can we put the tefillin on our bodies so that we're wearing it so that we can bring it home? And some of the questions that we've encountered in this discussion is, well, is Shabbos actually an appropriate time to wear tefillin or not? Are we fulfilling the obligation? Eventually we saw, no, it's not. Shabbos is not a time for tefillin. So we're not fulfilling our obligation. We're just putting it on ourselves as an adornment. Somebody here in the class asked, okay, well, you don't want to carry it. You're not putting it on as a mitzvah. That was important. It was important to understand that question, whether when we put it on just to save it, not with the intent of performing the mitzvah of wrapping tefillin, but rather just to put it on our bodies in a way that's not carrying so we can save it from being lost in the public domain. So if we can do that, one thing in the Mishna there was disagreement: can we put on 1 pair or 2 pairs? The unattributed author of the Mishna said 1 pair. Rabban Gamliel said 2 pair, but the halacha is 1 pair. Why 1 pair? Because that's the way we fulfill the mitzvah when we're fulfilling it. In other words, the correct way to wear tefillin is to have 1 on your arm and 1 on your head. And so if you're wearing it to bring it home, you can only put 1 pair on. Somebody here asked, well, if we're just wearing it to save it, why can't we, for example, just put 1 around our neck, and wear it like a necklace, just so that we can carry it home without carrying, as if we were wearing that adornment? And that question gets a little bit asked in today's page, but not really. And it's never really answered, at least not so far in our discussion. But it basically is being taken as a given that if you're gonna put on the tefillin in order to save it and bring it home, you have to wear it correctly. You can't wear it incorrectly. That's what we seem to be saying so far. Today's page, we're actually looking at a different question. Now the question is it tefillin? Right? So if we find this looks like tefillin, if I see this in the street, it's like, that's tefillin. That's obviously tefillin. What else would it be? But first of all, this is a very standardized form of tefillin that has come down to us over the centuries, and this is what it looks like. Thousands of years ago, it wasn't always so standardized. The boxes weren't perfect. The color wasn't perfect. There's a lot more variance between sets of tefillin, and it was possible that what you were looking at wasn't tefillin, but rather an amulet. Right, so as we've seen, that's come up in the Talmud, particularly in our first tractate in Brachos. We saw that there were healers who would use amulets as part of medical practice, right? And so there would be a box and some kind of a strap, and you'd put that on your body in some kind of a way, maybe as a necklace. And inside the box, there would be various objects, maybe even some kind of scroll with writing. And it's meant to be a healing item, right? This is the state of medicine thousands of years ago. It was understood that some amulets, were effective, and they would heal people. And once it was proven to be effective, then that was an amulet, right? So what we're seeing in our Mishna that we're discussing now is, on Shabbos, we'll go to this trouble and figure out if it's tefillin, we'll put it on and try to save it. But if it's an amulet, no. We won't. We have there might be a scroll in there, even with the name of God, but we don't know that for sure. We only know for sure that such scrolls are in Tefillin. So if it's Tefillin, we're going to save it. If it's not Tefillin, we're not going to save it. So the question is it Tefillin? How do we know it's Tefillin? That is the question that we're looking at right now. So the first answer that's given is, okay, well, if it's old Tefillin, then it's definitely Tefillin. And what does old mean? Old might mean, okay, like, see, this I've had, my Tefillin I think it's going on 20 years old now that I've been with it. Something like that, about that. And these straps, which in the beginning were very shiny and stiff and almost cardboard-like, now, I mean, I put them on every day, and it's very soft, supple leather. I actually had them, like a little maintenance done on them a few years ago, and so the leather was blacked a little. It actually faded somewhat. That doesn't matter. What the real question is, are these corners sharp? And there's some other issues, and that you have to have an expert look at them to tell you if your tefillin are okay. But really what distinguishes new tefillin from old tefillin, because what the Mishna says, if it's new tefillin, we're not going to save it because it might be an amulet. If it's old tefillin, we're going to save it. So how do you define old? It's not really, are the straps, nice and worn in? Does it look like it's been around for a while? Because people really take care of their tefillin. It might look new for quite some time. So, says the father of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Now that's an interesting thing to say. The father of Shmuel bar Yitzchak. So, who is the father of Shmuel bar Yitzchak? Well, Shmuel bar Yitzchak means Shmuel, the son of Rav Yitzchak. So presumably Rav Yitzchak is the father of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Why does the Gemara say, bring a teaching in the name of the father of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak? And presumably it's because there are a bunch of Rav Yitzchaks, right? And so we're not sure which Rav Yitzchak we're talking about if we just said Rav Yitzchak. But if we say the father of Shmuel bar Yitzchak, that's actually going to be a better identifier, sort of within the Talmudic community in Babylonia as it existed, probably in the year, somewhere between the year 200 and 500 of the Common Era. Okay, so the father of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak says that that old simply means that the straps have been properly tied. Okay, that the straps have been properly tied. And so what that means is that this knot in the head tefillin has been made. And you'll see, I think it's correct for camera, that this is a very particular knot. It's a difficult knot to tie and to tie accurately and properly. And it is in the shape of the Hebrew letter Dalet, which is the fourth letter of the alphabet, makes the D sound, and corresponds to the number 4. So that is the Dalet. And there's the other important knot, which is here on the arm tefillin. And this is a little bit hard to see. Let me just pull that out just a little bit. I can't really pull it out, but maybe you could see that this knot here is in the form of the letter Yud. So that's the 10th letter of the alphabet, the Yud. It's the first letter of one of the most important names of God. And these 3 letters, the shin, which is on the top of the head, and the daled, which is behind the head. So when this is on a person, and I'm not doing this, to do it. I'm just doing it for instructional purposes. Well. Ooh, okay. So it would be up here, and as we saw, it has to be between the hairline and the fontanelle and centered, properly centered. Hopefully I've got it. So you've got a shin on top of your head and a daled behind your head. I'm not going to put this on right now, but then the arm tefillin would be here on your bare arm, and so then you've got a yud on your arm opposite your heart. And so then what have you got? You've got 3 letters on your body, shin, daled, yud, and that spells, I'm going to say it as I'm teaching it, Shaddai, which is also a very important name of God. And that particular name of God connotes God's nurturing quality, right? So the way that God takes care of us and nurtures us, even it almost has a connotation of that we're suckling from God at all times, that we're receiving all our sustenance from God the way that a baby receives all its sustenance from its mother. Okay, so says the father of Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, if these knots are properly tied in these boxes with straps that you found on Shabbos, which look like tefillin to you, but you're not sure if they are tefillin, and he's saying if the knots are tied, it's tefillin. Because nobody's going to go to all the trouble to tie such knots to imitate tefillin on something that is actually an amulet. No, if it's got the knots in it, you can be confident that it's tefillin, and therefore you can proceed under the permission of this Mishna, that you can put it on, even though Shabbos isn't a time for tefillin, you can put it on just so that you can wear it and bring it home and save it from being abandoned in the public domain. Now, but what if, therefore, if it doesn't have the knots in it, right, then what we've got is maybe tefillin that is so new, it was in the process of being manufactured, and the knots hadn't been tied in it. So one possibility is it's not tefillin, it's an amulet. But now the Gemara says, well, wait a minute, what if it is tefillin? And just because the manufacturer, the craftsman who was making the tefillin, hadn't got around to tying the knots yet, now we're going to abandon it. So why not just tie a bow, like just some kind of a simple knot, so that we can get it over our head and bring it home and save it from being out there? So Rav Chisda is going to answer, yeah, no, you can't do that, because tefillin is tefillin, and you can't put some kind of a simple bow knot into tefillin so you can bring it home. So this really kind of answers that question. Was it Sharon who asked that the other day? That why not just put it around yourself in such a way that it's an adornment? It's not it's not wearing it like tefillin and bring it home. But here we have a partial answer to that. Rav Chisda says you can't do that. Tefillin, either you wear it properly or you don't wear it at all, even when you're just wearing it to take it home because you found it in the public domain on Shabbos. A bow knot is no good. Why did the Gemara suggest a bow knot? A bow knot means like a shoe, the knot you make in your shoelaces. It's a knot that has no real permanence. It's just the one you use to tie your shoes. Are we allowed to tie our shoes on Shabbos? Yes, of course we can tie our shoes on Shabbos. But this was a discussion that we encountered in Tractate Shabbos. Can we make knots? Because knots were part of making the tabernacle when the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness. And it's what kinds of labor are prohibited on Shabbos? All of the labors that were necessary to construct the tabernacle in the wilderness, the Mishkan. They made knots. In fact, knot making was a big part of making that tent. That was the holy tent and the center of Jewish observance in the wilderness, and for the next 400 years after the Jews entered the land of Israel. But what we're talking about when we're talking about the knots that were used in the Mishkan is very permanent knots, right? And we saw if you're making the kind of knot on a sandal that's going to remain tied, right? There's some knots that you untie to get in and out of a sandal, and there's other knots that remain tied all the time. So the kind that would remain tied, you can't do that on Shabbos. Likewise, on Shabbos, let's say you found new tefillin, you're like, that really is tefillin. I'm sure it's tefillin. They just haven't got around to making the knot. Could I tie the knot if that was a skill that I possessed? On Shabbos, no, you cannot, because you can't, that is a forbidden labor on Shabbos to tie permanent knots. Okay. So then says, but with regard to making a bow knot, there were actually some sages who said you can't even do that. Who was that? Abaye says Rabbi Yehuda said that a bow is a knot, and even that would not be permitted on Shabbos. But in fact, the reason that Rabbi Yehuda objected to saving the tefillin, the new tefillin that doesn't have the knots in it, isn't because you might tie it with a bow knot. It's because it might be an amulet, and we don't, make these kinds of incursions on the laws of Shabbos in order to save something that might well be an amulet. Only when for sure it's tefillin. Okay, so where do we learn how to make tefillin? So the Gemara is now going to digress a little bit and say, well, these knots, these very specialized knots, how do we know how to make that knot? It's definitely not spelled out in the Torah. The Torah just says that you will bind these words, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your resources. And these words which I command you on this day shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them faithfully to your children. You shall speak of them when you're sitting in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You will bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be a symbol before your eyes. That's part of the V'ahavta, which follows the Shema. We recite that at least twice a day, every day. How do we know how to tie these knots and what tefillin look like? Says Rav Yehuda, the permanent knots of tefillin and how we form them are a halacha, a law, leMoshe mi Sinai. They are a law that was given to Moshe at Sinai. Right? So so there are many laws that are part of the oral tradition. Right now we're doing the commentary, which is the Gemara, on a Mishna. Right? So the Mishna is the core of the sort of captured and written down and codified oral law. And it includes many statements by Rabbi Eliezer, by Rabbi Akiva, by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, etc. So obviously those were added over time. I mean, those people lived, anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 years after the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. But there are some laws which are included in the Mishnah, which were given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. And those are the very core of the oral law, and this is one of them. So the form of this knot that is in the shape of a daled, right? That's not reversed for you. So that was taught to Moses at Mount Sinai by God, and he taught it to the elders, and the elders taught it to the prophets, etc. And it's been passed down from teacher to student ever since. Okay, and then I just wanted to mention, because people might be curious. So if you look at the head tefillin, this is not being discussed on our daf right now, but since I've mentioned that you are wearing the name of God, right? You have a shin, a daled, and a yud. What's interesting, people are often curious about on the head tefillin, so there is a shin, I think you can see that pretty clearly, on one side of the box. This is the front, and you can see that there's 4 separations for the scrolls that are inside. This is the shin that is on one side of the box, and is the first letter of God's name. It is also the first letter of the word for name in Hebrew. And on the other side, there is a very unusual shin, which is a 4-pronged shin, and this is the only place where that shin is used in Jewish practice. It's on the tefillin. So on one side, there's a 3-pronged shin. On the other side, there's a 4-pronged shin. And that seems to be something else that's just been passed down for thousands of years in the tradition. A lot has been written on what is the meaning of the 4-pronged shin. Something that I read on Rav Kook Torah, very nice. So when you're talking about the 4-pronged shin, what you're really talking about is it's kind of like a reversed shin. It's like when we talk about negative film, it's sort of, white is black, black is white. Really what this 4-pronged shin is doing is capturing the 3-pronged shin, which is in between those legs, right? So there really is a 3-pronged shin in there. It's just been reversed. And what that refers to is that the Torah was given to us through 2 different media, parchment and stone. Stone in the 10 Commandments. Parchment as it was dictated to Moses, and he wrote it down on a written Sefer Torah, which has been copied over and over for thousands of years. And so the Sefer Torah, the Torah scrolls that are sitting in our synagogues, right, is the same Torah that was given to Moses all those thousands of years ago. Now, when it's written down, black ink on white parchment, or as we're taught elsewhere, black fire on white fire, so then it's the three-pronged shin. When a three-pronged shin is engraved in the stone of the tablets of the Ten Commandments, right? There, the letters were kind of negative space, because when God carved the Ten Commandments, the writing went right through the stone. In fact, when you had a letter like a mem or a samech, a letter that's fully circular, the middle piece that should fall out and should just leave like a sort of circular cylinder there, but that middle was miraculously suspended in the Ten Commandments. God can obviously perform such a minor miracle if he's appearing to 2 million people, inscribing stones and speaking to all of them. In addition, he engraved the Ten Commandments, and these little pieces hung in there. When a shin was engraved in the Ten Commandments in the stone, again, it's like you had that four-pronged shin of stone surrounding the empty space of the three-pronged shin. And what we're to learn from that is that if we study on a regular basis, the way you and I are doing here, getting together every day to study these laws passed down for thousands of years, to try and understand the tradition, to climb inside the law, as it were. And when we do that, it's like we're having a spiritual experience by doing that. If this all seems dry and boring, you're not doing it right? Or I'm not doing it right. I'm not teaching it right. But when we really get inside the Torah and the teaching is inspiring enough, so then because God and His Torah are one, it's like we're having a fusion, like a meld with the Holy One. And so if our study becomes like that, inspiring and deep, and really penetrates our hearts, then what begins as ink on parchment ends engraved in our hearts, like the four-pronged shin that was in the tablets of the Ten Commandments. And that's kind of what we're aiming for in all of our learning. Okay, let's continue. Right, so we have a teaching here that Rav Chisda said in the name of Rav, that one who purchases a large quantity of tefillin, right? So let's say that you are a retailer, right? You sell tefillin in the market in the old days, right? Or you had a storefront of some sort. More likely you had a table at the market. So you would go to the manufacturer, you would buy a bunch of pairs of tefillin, you would bring them right to the market and sell them. So when you're buying from the manufacturer and you're buying this large quantity, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're buying kosher tefillin. This is going to become relevant because the Mishna also talks about what happens if you don't just find one pair of tefillin or two pair of tefillin, but what if you find bundles of tefillin or wrapped piles of tefillin, and what do you do then? So before we get to what do you do with that situation, first the Mishnah, the Gemara is going to tell us, well, what is your obligation when you are buying, because this is maybe that's how we're finding lost on Shabbos, that right, it was a wholesaler or a retailer who bought a bunch of pairs of tefillin wholesale, and he dropped them off his cart, God forbid, and that's what we're finding, and we're going to deal with it, right? So just to sort of understand what we might be dealing with, so one who purchases a large quantity of tefillin from one that is not known to be an expert, right? So if he's been buying from the same guy for years and they've always been kosher, okay, so he can assume that they're kosher tefillin. But let's say that guy, goes out of business, retires, dies, whatever. Now he's got to buy tefillin from a new craftsman who's making tefillin, and the craftsman brings out a whole bunch of pairs. Does he have to examine every single one to make sure that it's kosher? Maybe doing a proper examination of these knots and the boxes and to make sure that everything's been done right will take so much time that it's commercially not feasible for this seller. So what is his minimum responsibility to make sure that what he's going to be selling to his customers is kosher tefillin? And the answer is he has to examine 3. He has to examine 3 of the tefillins, and not 3 whole pairs, which you might have expected, But it's enough that he examines either 2 head pieces and 1 arm piece, or 2 arm pieces and 1 head piece. Why 3? That's an important principle that we're going to encounter again and again in the Talmud, and this is called a chazaka. A chazaka is a presumptive state that is achieved when something happens 3 times. When something happens 3 times in a row, you can assume that it's going to keep happening as a legal matter until evidence to the contrary surfaces, and then you say, okay, the chazaka was wrong. But when something happens 3 times in a row, it's a chazaka. So we often, joke when, for instance, people meet for a new minyan, a new prayer group that hasn't met before, and they get together 3 times at somebody's backyard during a time of plague, which has happened a lot in recent times. So then they might say to each other, wow, we've done it 3 times. It's a chazaka. We have to keep meeting every day. So that's how that concept is used, the chazaka. So if you check 3, it's a chazaka. We also see this elsewhere, God forbid, that if a woman, gets married and her husband dies, okay, so she's a widow, it's a terrible break. Then she marries again and the second husband dies. There we have a disagreement. Rebbe says once she's lost 2 husbands, it's a chazaka that this woman's husbands die, and she shouldn't get married. But Rebbe was overruled by the majority of the rabbis who said, no, it takes 3 to establish a chazaka. God forbid, a woman marries 3 husbands and all 3 die. That's a chazaka. And then we would say, it's not that you're prohibited to marry this woman, but it's considered dangerous because for some reason all her husbands die. That's, it's a sordid, sort of, dark, emotional example, but it's an example that is used elsewhere in the Talmud of what a chazaka is and why Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says that chazaka is established with 2 instances, but the rabbis say 3. And so here you would have to examine 3. However, if you are a seller of tefillin and you buy from multiple craftsmen who are making them, you have to examine at least 3 tefillin, 3 pieces of tefillin from each person that you buy from. The Mishna said that if one finds bundles or wrapped piles on Shabbos, what do you do with them? You can't, wear so many and escort them to safety by wearing them and get them to safety. And actually the answer is, if there's enough time in the day for you to put on 1 tefillin, get it home, come back, put on another tefillin, get it back home, then you do that. But if there's not enough time in the day to do that, what do? You just sit there and guard them. Right? You sit there and guard them until night falls, and then you just pick up the bundles and take it home. However, the Mishnah also said that in a time of danger, I'm getting close to the end now, so if you have questions or comments, please put them in there, and I will address your questions and comments soon. So if it's a time of danger, the rule is going to be different. In a time of danger, it says, in a time of danger, what do? We just cover them so that they're not obvious in the public domain. Cover them with whatever you can. Maybe there's some leaves nearby. Maybe you could just, walk them just 4 cubits at a time and put them somewhere where they're going to be out of view so that you can come and rescue them later after Shabbos. What is a time of danger? So there's going to be a little disagreement here. What is a time of danger? So we have a baraisa that says, in a time of danger, what you should do is pick them up, walk 4 cubits, put them down, pick them up, walk 4 cubits, put them down. Because you can carry something less than 4 cubits, right? Up to 4 cubits. If you carry something more than 4 cubits, you're violating Shabbos. But carrying something 4 cubits or more in the public domain. But if you just carry them a little less than 4 cubits is about 6 feet, 2 meters. So if you just carry them a little bit and then put them down and then pick them up and carry them, like 2 steps each time, and then you could get them to safety. So the baraisa, contemporaneous with the Mishnah, a little less authoritative, says, in a time of danger, right, you can pick them up and walk them 4 cubits and get them home that way, just 4 cubits at a time. So the Gemara is asking, what is a time of danger? In the Mishna, it says cover them up and walk away. In the Baraisa, it says carry them 4 cubits at a time and get them home. Which is it? And so the Gemara explains there's 2 different kinds of danger that are being referenced in the Mishnah and in the Baraisa. The Mishnah is talking about danger from Gentiles. That's the way it's put. What does that mean? When it says danger from Gentiles, it means Gentiles who are going to persecute us for being Jewish. Specifically, it's talking about Romans, right? I mean, anti-Semitism and genocide has existed against the Jews in so many countries and times and places in history. But what's being referenced here is a time of danger where they're going to kill you for being Jewish. Particularly, they're going to kill you for doing Jewish practice, right? So if they see you with Jewish ritual objects, that's something that they'll kill you for. Nazi Germany, Inquisition Spain, pogroms in Russia, Ukraine, and particularly the Roman oppression in the Holy Land. The Baraisa, which says pick them up and walk 2 steps, put it down, pick them up, walk 2 steps, put it down, like that's going to be very visible. But you're saving them from danger. That's a very different kind of danger. Now you're trying to save the tefillin from bandits. Meaning you're just trying to save the tefillin from bandits who will pick them up, steal them, and try to sell them on the market somewhere, right? So it's 2 very different kinds of danger. One, you're in danger as a Jew if you have Jewish ritual objects on you. The other, the tefillin is in danger from being stolen by bandits. Abaye says, so then why does Rabbi Shimon say in the Mishnah that in a time of danger, it would be preferable to, instead of walking them 2 steps at a time, pass them from one person to another? Right? So no one is going to carry it more than 4 cubits, but you can pass it to him, and then he passes it to him, and he passes it to him. It's like you're making a human chain to bring those bundles of tefillin to safety. So says Abaye, if Rabbi Shimon is talking about that, that's even more conspicuous than one person picking it up, walk 2 steps, put it down, pick it up, walk 2 steps, put it down. So that's so conspicuous. So then, therefore, the time of danger that's referenced in the Mishnah must not be this kind of persecution. Maybe that means bandits also. And the Gemara says, well, the Mishnah is incomplete. What the Mishnah means to say is that if it's the kind of danger from Gentiles who want to kill Jews for using Jewish ritual objects, you cover it up and walk away and come back after Shabbos. But if it's the kind of danger where bandits might steal the tefillin, pick it up, walk 2 steps, pick it up, walk 2 steps, put it down, pick it up, walk 2 steps, put it down. And Rabbi Shimon says better than 2 steps at a time, 4 cubits at a time, is to form a human chain or just have a few people working together and they pass it to each other and get it to safety that way. And the question is, why does Rabbi Shimon say it's better to have a few people working together, passing it one person to another, than one person just picking it up, walk 2 steps, put it down over and over? Because if there's multiple people there, it's much less likely that any of the individuals involved in the rescue effort will forget and make a mistake and come to carry the objects more than 4 cubits and thereby violate Shabbos. And that is a very good general principle when we're trying to elevate ourselves and do holy work and fulfill our obligations and be mensches and do good deeds in the world. We are much more likely to succeed if we do it together with others. And we are much less likely to make mistakes and come to, even do an inadvertent transgression, again, if we're working together with others. That's what I've got for us today. Let's look at your comments and questions. Okay, Bill, I have to admit, I was a little surprised to learn that the tefillin were muksa. I assume because of their religious significance that anything to do with the tefillin would be the business of heaven and therefore exempt. But since we don't do that business on Shabbos, it turns out they're muksa. And not everyone agrees on that. For sure, everyone agrees that we don't put tefillin on Shabbos. And because we don't put them on Shabbos, we don't touch them. Are they actually muksa? Shulchan Aruch says yes. Others say, well, it seems like it's almost like the same discomfort that you're expressing, Bill, some of the commentators have expressed too. But the bottom line is we don't put them on Shabbos, and so we don't touch them on Shabbos. Lynn, clothing items cannot be worn unusually either, or they become carried, like a man's belt that is not actually holding up his pants. Tricky rulings. Very good point, Lynn. So wearing tefillin correctly does seem logical. Also, the 3-prong shin and the 4-prong shin, she's heard it interpreted as the 3-prong shin refers to the 3 patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the 4-prong shin, beautiful interpretation, refers to the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And of course, these are the stories that we're studying right now in the book of Genesis in our yearly cycle of reading the Torah. We just finished Parshas Chaya Sarah, in which Rebecca, we meet Rebecca, the great, biblical heroine, Rebecca, and how she comes to be Isaac's wife. And now we're entering Toldos and the story of Isaac and Rebecca leading to Jacob and the 12 tribes. Carolyn Dobson Chavez. So, the second tablets cut by Moses were not tablets but parchment? No. The second tablets were also tablets, but they only had the 10 commandments on them. What Moses took dictation for and wrote on parchment was the rest of the Torah, right? So the 5 books of Moses, those were written on parchment. But there is a beautiful teaching that the second tablets, the first tablets were carved by God and inscribed by God. The second tablets were carved by Moses and inscribed by God. So the second tablets sort of representing that fallen state of the all too human Jews who right at the beginning of, in the presence of God at Mount Sinai, managed to do a wildly awful sin of the golden calf. And really, God might have destroyed us all right then and there and started the Jewish project over again with Moses and his progeny. But Moses begged for mercy. So the point is that the second tablets are a team effort between God and the humans, right? The humans represented by Moses. But the 2 sets of the tablets were both written on stone. And Lynn says, Judah refused Tamar, his 3rd son. Right, so this is where we learn this idea of the chazak, and I think this is where Rebbe gets that 2 is enough. Because Judah refused Tamar, his 3rd son, right? So Tamar was Yehuda's daughter-in-law, and she married first his one son, and then he died. And then the second son was Onan, who didn't want to, marry her and give her children that would be raised in the name of his brother. Very, very bad characteristic of Onan, and God took Onan. And so now she had lost 2 husbands. And then Yehuda didn't want to give her another child, who at that point was too young. He was too young to marry anyway. But when he got older, she was waiting for him because that was the way things were handled at that time. But he was afraid that another son would die if he married her. Ultimately, he marries her. And he does so when he publicly acknowledges that she is in the right and he was wrong. It's a tremendous story of growth that we'll encounter in a few weeks in the weekly Torah portion, and really that's the reason we're all called Jews after Judah, and Judah's name means gratitude. It's based on the word for gratitude, and it implies that potential for growth, that we all make mistakes. That's human. What do we do with our mistakes? Growing from them, acknowledging them, asking for help from God to do better, etc. That is something we aspire to do, and that's what it means to be a Jew. And finally, Lucy says, also, if you formed a chain, you can pass a number of tefillins through the chain. Right, very good. I mean, sure, it would be a great way to rescue. It's not always possible, obviously, to organize a whole bunch of people to make that chain, but it would be good, and you could pass a bunch of tefillin up the chain. One of the things that I didn't mention, Abaye says, if you make that chain, that's even more conspicuous, right, than a person just walking 2 steps at a time. You wouldn't want to do that if the danger was like the Romans want to kill us for handling tefillin. But if you're saving them from bandits and you have that possibility of making the human chain, absolutely a great idea. Sort of like a fire brigade, right? A bucket brigade to put out a fire, like in old West towns where they didn't have, running water to put out the fire, like a fire truck. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. It's a great start to our week. We've been learning together. We want to engrave Torah in our hearts, learn from it, grow, be inspired. And what a lovely way to start the week together on a Saturday night. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night and a great week. Shavua Tov and a good Vach.